Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptid Creator Corner, brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Hello and welcome to Comic Book Yeti's Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm one of your hosts, Jimmy Gasparo, and I have a returning guest today on the podcast, and I am very excited because it doesn't seem like it was that long ago they were on, but it's always a lot. It's always longer than I thought it was. But they have been very busy because not only are they, I think issue 9 of Space Ghost just came out.
Yeah.
They're here as part of Marvel March because we're going to talk about Cable, Love, and Chrome. And just recently announced they're going to have a free comic book day issue of Speed Racer with Mad Cave. And just announced today as we record this podcast, they are going to be working on Captain Planet. So I am so excited to talk about that as well. Please welcome to the podcast, or welcome back to the podcast, David Pepose. David, how you doing?
Jimmy, thank you so much for having me. What a lovely introduction. And yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to catch up with you.
No, it's absolutely my pleasure. I've been loving Space Ghost.
Thank you.
I think I don't think I'm totally caught up. I think I've read through issue 8. So I think I'm one behind what's out as we record this. But yeah, because and issue 8 that I just ended on was phenomenal. But Space Ghost was one of those things that I always knew like a little bit about. I feel like when Space Ghost was first on, I was like a tiny bit too young, and then when Space Ghost kind of came back, like Space Ghost Coast to Coast, it was tangentially on my radar. But I am loving your series.
Thank you.
It's so much fun. I love the artwork in it. It's
Yeah, Jonathan Lau doing
Jonathan
a terrific
Lau,
job with colorist Andrew Dahlhaus and letterer Taylor Esposito. They really are
Yeah.
the dream team.
It's phenomenal. But I guess I should start. We'll talk about Space Ghost because I said this is Marvel March. Currently, Cable, Love, and Chrome. Issue 1 is out. Issue 2 comes out February. Issue 3, as of right now, I think is slated for March 19th.
Yes, that sounds right.
And folks who listen to this podcast, whenever Marvel comics come up, because, so many creators come on and you're like, oh, what sparked your love of comics? And the number of folks that point to something like X-Men, which I've read a little bit of. And I know
It's a small
most
obscure
of what
comic. I get it.
Yeah. It's not in a lot of places. It was tough to get. I just don't know why. I've talked about it before. I always gravitated towards DC. I was never somebody that's like, oh, I love DC. I hate Marvel.
Sure.
Never the case. It was just when I was first into comics, I read Marvel a little bit, and then when I got back into comics, I got back in kind of because of DC, and some of the Marvel stuff felt a little impenetrable to me. But I'm trying to get over that, especially as I talk to more folks who are writing Marvel comics. So what I essentially know about Cable,
Yeah.
and most of what I know from Marvel is because I collected the 1990 and 91 Marvel trading cards, which I still have.
Yeah.
But
that's the perfect way to get on board. That's a perffically valid way to get to learn Marvel characters.
I actually have the Thanos card in a little slipcase that I use as a bookmark.
Oh, nice. That rules. I got my whole binder of Marvel Masterworks back in my Marvel Masterpieces back in my parents' house. I know exactly.
Right.
I'm picking down what you're putting up.
So, and I know of Cable from the Marvel movies in terms of Josh Brolin's performance. Sure. So I don't come with a lot of baggage to something like Cable, Love, and Chrome. And that's always a little daunting to me. Like, even when I first got back into reading comics and some more of the DC stuff, there was so much that I had missed that I felt like I had to have Wikipedia opened as I read it. So I got issue 1, knowing that we were going to talk about it. I freaking loved it.
Oh,
I mean, I felt like I knew a little bit about the character. I got a little bit about who he was and travels through time, this, that, and the other thing. The book does just enough exposition for new readers. which as someone who essentially is, I didn't feel like I was missing like a ton of backstory, and I didn't feel like I had to read like pages of dialogue or pages of exposition in order to understand like what it was I was getting into.
I'm so
The
glad.
that you've like also you kind of set him up in this opening scenario for issue 1, which is it gave me like a bit of like, Mad Max kind of
Totally.
vibes just in terms of his like scenario. And then he's instantly, you know, another fight, and then he's like somewhere else. And if for as big over the top action that it was,
Yeah.
um and I think is Mike Henderson doing the art?
Yes. Yes, he is.
Yeah. As big over the top action as it was, which I absolutely loved, like, I loved, like, digging into who this guy was.
Well,
Like,
thank
when you
you.
put him in this new setting and you introduce, I think, a new character,
Yeah.
Avery,
Yep. Brand new.
um, I mean, the relationship that we see between the 2 of them just start to develop. I mean, I loved it. I was all in a way that I was, I figured I'd like it because I like your writing, and
Yeah.
I know that, some of the stuff that of yours that I've read before, whether or not it was the current Space Ghost or the OZ, um, I figured I would, at least have that comfort level of I know David knows what he's doing. He always puts together a good story. But man, there was just some like bad assery in there, and the way he comes across, I loved it. Um I thought it was so good.
It's really
Like
kind of you to say all this because I feel like hearing your history with cable, in a lot of ways, you are kind of my target audience. Cable. I said this in an interview I did yesterday. Is that when you read X-Men stories, there's a certain brand of X-Men fan that loves the crazy continuity and the weird off branches of the side opera. I think for a book like X-Men that's had so many ancillary titles and had so many retcons on retcons, it becomes almost a feature rather than a bug. But that can be like
sure.
very intimidating for new readers, for sure. And Cable is, I think, in that regard, the most X-Man-y of X-Men characters. He's this character who He's he starts off as Rob Liefeld's mysterious big gun guy in the waning pages of New Mutants before it rebrands as X-Force. And then we find out later that through a retcon that Cable actually was the infant son of Cyclops and the clone of Jean Grey, Madeline Pryor, who was infected by Apocalypse with the techno-organic virus and sent to the far future in hopes to find, if not a cure, something to stabilize him. And then he goes back in time to try to stop Apocalypse as this big, soldier of time. And that's not including like the 12. That's not including Teen Cable. That's not including his jaunts in the future with Baby Hope Summers running away from Bishop. Cable, I used to joke that his mutant power is exposition. Uh, there's there's a lot to Cable as a character, and for me, this is kind of a mission statement that I always try to do with my books, particularly licensed books. And sometimes I do think that might occasionally rub the super fans the wrong way. Because there are a lot of super fans who they know the lore, they know the continuity, they want to get deep in the weeds. And for me personally, I try to write with a more evergreen kind of presence. That I want to trim down the thickets of continuity to make it a little more manageable, so that if there's a reader like you who doesn't really know Cable from a hole in the wall or doesn't know him outside of being, Josh Brolin in the second Deadpool movie, that you
Right.
can figure out who he is. And the way that story came about to me was I've worked with my editor, Tom Brevoort, on most of my Marvel projects. He was my editor on Savage Avengers. He brought me in at Marvel. I worked with him on Moon Knight City of the Dead. I worked with him on my Punisher miniseries. And we had talked sort of some preliminary ideas about possibly like doing a new Punisher series after our miniseries wrapped. But those plans changed when Tom was tapped to take over the X-Men office. So Tom messages me and says, "Hey, it was a couple hours before the news broke." And he said, "Hey, I want you to hear this from me before it goes wide in the trades. Like, I'm taking over X-Men. That means Punisher's going to go to another office. And they may have other plans that they want to do. But do you have any interest in X-Men?" And I grew up, I'm a 90s kid. I grew up Pride of the X-Men. I love that VHS. I wore that thing out. X-Men, the animated series, the Pizza Hut reading tie-ins, all of that. That's my vintage. And so I love the X-Men, but I also just love working with Tom. He's got like laser guided storytelling instincts, and he never treats your books like a statistic, no matter how many plates he's spinning. I find that so admirable, a quality in an editor. So I told him, of course, like, wherever you want me, let me know. So as those books were being divvied up, Tom reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you have any interest in Cable?" And I think that felt like an organic sort of branching off point from Punisher that we just wrapped up. So Tom said to me, "I'm kind of looking for there's a type of story I want to tell with Cable. I want to do kind of a time travel romance story with him. That's something that's never really been done before." And as we talked about it, we started discussing like that's an interesting way to give Cable personal stakes while not sacrificing any of the larger than life, bombastic, big guns, big action, big attitude of the 90s that spawned Cable, that defined him. And I countered back with, well, this is a 5-issue miniseries. And uh, the thing is that I know Cable well enough to know he's had some very iconic love interests over the years. There's been Domino from X-Force, sort of his big, long time love interest. Esme Cuckoo was something that they played up in the Krakoa era, particularly with Teen Cable. There's Hope Summers' adopted mother in the far future, and Dwayne Swarzynski's 2008 run, which is a very underrated gem. I really love that. Even like Jen Scott, who was like a far future, fighter in his original miniseries. So these are all characters that have had a lot longer of a runway than a 5-issue mini. And so
Yeah.
the challenge that I kind of took upon myself was, how do we justify that? How do we justify somebody that is essentially a short timer? There's no guarantee that anybody's going to pick this character up after this miniseries.
Right.
And so the way we cracked it was, I was walking. There's a park nearby where I live, and so my wife and I were walking around that park. And as I tend to like just kind of talk out loud to try to get the story out. And my wife is a genius. She's so smart. She's not a comics fan, but she's a voracious reader, and she's an excellent listener. And she said, "Well, what's Cable's deal? Like, what makes him unique as a character?" And that was sort of the light bulb moment for me. Um, the X-Men have other telepaths. They got Jean Grey, they got Emma Frost, they got Psylocke. The X-Men have other gun guys. You see Deadpool, you see Phantom X. They've got other time travelers. Bishop, Rachel Summers, even Kitty Pryde did it at one point. The thing that makes Cable unique is that before the legacy virus, before Mpox, before RLDS, or whatever virus du jour of your generation,
Right.
Cable struggled with the techno-organic virus. That has been his unique thing. And for me, that really struck me as like a parallel to people in the real world dealing with chronic, lifelong, sometimes terminal conditions, whether that's cancer or ALS or Parkinson's or Crohn's, just to name a few. And that made the character make sense to me. Of course, you're going to be this big, bombastic, larger than life guy if deep inside oh, I'm living on borrowed time. That I'm sort of fighting this virus with telekinesis, but one day even that's not going to work and the virus is going to win. But if I project strength on the outside, maybe I can convince myself that I'll live to see tomorrow. And that really became kind of the crux of our new character, Avery Ryder, where I said, Cable's been alone in this fight. He's had people who've loved him and people who've supported him, but nobody really understands the struggle. So I wanted to give Cable somebody who did. Avery lives in Salvation Bay. That's a dystopian future city that the techno-organic virus has been an ongoing concern. And so it's his struggle, his internal struggle externalized. But Avery has community. She's had, I think, the mental space to think about this, about what does the virus mean, in terms of, you know, for example, thinking about her own mortality. If you're somebody, I think many people take tomorrow for granted. They just assume the sun's gonna
Yeah.
rise, they've got another day. But there are people who, they have conditions where maybe the end is a little bit closer in sight. Maybe they don't know how much longer they've got. And so
You
one of the questions that Avery asks is, if you know that you could die at any moment, do you wanna die in a hospital bed? Do you wanna die on your own terms? Do you wanna die with your boots on? And I think conversely, how do you maximize the time you have left? What do you have that's worth living for? What do you have that's worth fighting for? Because if you don't have that, if you're just fighting just for the sake of fighting, if you don't have anything to live for, maybe the virus has already won. And that's some really interesting thematic texture that I've never been able to approach in any other book. And I think Avery really is kind of the mouthpiece for a lot of the themes of this book that Cable, throughout all of his history, has never really been able to have that talk. And so we were able to kind of have our cake and eat it too. We have the big bombastic 90s action that everybody loves about Cable. But we're able to kind of peel back some layers and really dig into who he is in his most kind of vulnerable emotional core. And
Yeah.
you'll see in this story, it's a time travel romance that really focuses on mortality. And if you lose somebody and you're a time traveler, you might go to desperate lengths to keep that going. I pitched the book as Edge of Tomorrow meets The Fault in Our Stars, and it's a
Okay.
unique kind of mashup. But seeing the response to the book, particularly people who do deal with chronic conditions, um, it's been, I think, some of my favorite reviews I've gotten across my career.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that, because you have and with some of the things you just said, smartly done a couple of things, and because the rest of the creative team, they're all executed, very well. And it's true. I tried to get it across when I started, but you lose nothing in terms of the action sequences. There are some absolutely right from the jump, some incredible ones, but I'm a big fan of time travel stories, like, that's, like, my number 1 go-to, and
Yeah.
I love what you have here where you've kind of, in terms of with the techno-organic virus, so I love that interplay of time travel and borrowed time in terms of mortality. You've also now given not just one person who also is dealing with the techno-organic virus, but a small community
Yeah.
that Cable has stumbled into. And not just that, but they're a community that is being oppressed by the big bad,
The
the
Prime Conclave.
conclave, the
Yeah.
prime conclave, um, and quickly juxtaposition, Cable and Avery against them. And you have a little bit of like speed thrown in, I think, when you have two characters who are in this kind of situation very
Yeah.
quickly. They're like it comes across on the page, like the chemistry between Cable and Avery. Yeah, it's so well done.
Well, thank you. It was one of those things. I think I come by it honestly in that every time I have pitched a story to Tom, for the most part, there's been some degree of a romance angle. Savage Avengers. I was the one that pitched. I was like, it's Cloak and Dagger. They're separated by an ampersand. Let's do a love triangle. Let's throw in Flash Thompson in the mix. So that way, this sort of will they, won't they, we can finally answer that. We can sort of build to that point. Moon Knight City of the Dead has a lot of shared DNA with Cable, Love, and Chrome, and that was a two-hander with Moon Knight and Scarlet Scarab
Right.
as sort of these long lost exes who still feel this kind of longing and responsibility towards each other. Even Punisher, to an extent, was kind of the what happens when that's taken away.
Yeah.
You know, the absence of that, and in our third issue, sort of the perversion of that deep set of love that sort of puts Joe on a long-term path. Um, and yeah, you know, like one of my earliest books was a book called Going to the Chapel, which was like Die Hard at a wedding.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
great.
and
I love going to the chapel.
so I think it's an underrated way to build drama and emotional investment in a story. I think it's something that's very often overlooked. Or it's sort of relegated to, oh, here's sort of like the side soap opera stuff, which is always the first thing to get cut when you only have 20 pages to tell a story that has to like get the plot going.
Sure.
So, yeah, it's funny. I feel like I've carved out like two niches in Marvel. It's like the extreme guy, and then like also doing romances. Uh, it's not a niche I expected to carve out for myself, but I think it's definitely challenged me as a writer. Cable and Avery in particular, I do a lot of rewriting ahead of the lettering stage. Once we have the art in, I do like actual mock-ups of all the lettering, and oftentimes I will rewrite dialogue within an inch of its life because like it's not clicking. They're not the characters aren't flowing the way that I'd like for them to. It took me 3 issues to really crack Cable's voice. I was watching Bad Monkey and listening to Scott Glenn as the narrator, and I was like, "Oh,
Oh,
that's Cable.
okay.
That's Cable." Because that was a big challenge.
Good show, by the way. I
Yeah,
really enjoyed
excellent
Bad
show.
Monkey. Yeah.
Um, uh, because that was a big challenge for me was coming off of Punisher is how do you differentiate this guy?
Sure.
Because they're both kind of stoic gun guys, and so for Cable, for me, the one of it was time travel, just the setting, but it was also the scale of it all. You mentioned Mad Max Fury Road, and that was a big influence. I pitched Cable as Mad Max if he had gotten a hold of a time machine. He's a born survivor. Things tend to explode when he's around.
Yeah.
Lots of destruction in his wake, but he also kind of has a little bit of a sense of humor to it.
Well, yeah, I was
Uh,
gonna say, I mean, I think that would be the biggest difference between your Punisher and your Cable is there is a certain swagger to the way you write Cable, and I mean, also in the artwork as well, like what Henderson is doing with you. But,
yeah,
there is much more of a humor, like, there's you don't it doesn't go too far where it's a breaking the fourth wall, wink,
yeah,
Deadpool type of thing, it's not that at all, but, yeah, it is a very it is like a very fun, like, 80s action comedy
yeah.
kind
There's a little bit of
like,
like a
vibe to it.
Yeah, there's like a little bit of a twang to him almost, there's like a
Yeah,
little bit of like some Western texture to him.
yeah,
Something that this is a guy
little
who's been around the block, you
right,
know.
yeah.
So the explosions don't necessarily phase him as much, and so he's able to kind of throw in an 80s one-liner here and there. Um, but yeah, this was certainly, like I said, this was a challenging book for me, for a number of reasons. First, just like simplifying Cable. How do you just make him accessible to a big readership? Because, like I said, there's a certain X-Men fan that lives for like the crazy continuity and getting deep in the weeds with all that stuff. But that's not that's not where my heart lies as a creator. And more importantly, I think if you try to dig that deep into the continuity weeds, um, I think you run the risk of your book being aged prematurely. Like my goal is always if I'm at a convention 5 years from now, I would like to be able to still sell that book and it would still feel accessible and resonant to you. Um, and then of course there's the time travel elements. There's definitely some tricky structural elements to it all, and you'll get to see that unfold in the latter half of the book. But it's gonna pay off in a really crazy way that's going to make Cable's personal problems suddenly become everybody else's problem.
Excellent.
Sort of lending some more scale to the mix. But I couldn't be more thrilled with the response of the book. I wasn't sure how Cable fans would take it. A romance story with Cable certainly goes against the grain, but I think people seem to get the vision that I'm going for with it, and that Mike and I are going for, and so yeah, it's been a very heartening experience to see people responding as strongly as they have to this book.
Oh, that's great. I mean, because I thought it was awesome, and I love the title.
Thank you.
Cable Loving Chrome. It reminds me of I don't know, the title of it reminds me of like a Jim Steinman Meatloaf song, which I'm a big fan of. So I mean that as a compliment.
Well,
In case
that was
someone who's listening is not a Meatloaf fan.
that was also an homage to Cable's very first miniseries, which was called Cable Blood and Metal.
Yeah.
And, so I thought that would be, like, kind of a nice, little homage
Yeah.
to that, and, yeah, people seem to vibe on it, like, this is the kinda Cable story you could paint your van to, and, so, yeah, I'm excited for people to see, what we've got coming because, Cable and Avery, they're gonna come closer, before circumstances get in the way. And that's gonna
All
make
right.
things very difficult on all involved.
Nice. Well, by the time this episode comes out, issue 2 will have been released, I think February 12th. And then you'll be able to go to your local comic shop to get issue 3, which should be on the stands March 19th. Um yeah, so that's awesome. So we could turn just a little bit. I started talking about Space Ghost a little earlier, but yeah, I really love the Space Ghost run. It is I like it feels very like episodic, like you can
Yeah.
tell it's like a continuing story, but each issue is kind of like a new setting for Space Ghost and Jan and Jace and Blip. But yeah, I really am enjoying where it's going. I mean, how have you been finding it in terms of as you get through like each issue? Um, working on a property like that. I think we had talked a bit about it last time you were
Yeah,
on, but now that you're, I guess I think by the time this podcast comes out,
in
it'll
March.
be right before issue 11's on the stand, maybe?
Yeah, that's yes, that sounds right. Um, yes, I said I'm writing issue 12 as we speak, so
Okay.
I'm I'm temporarily challenged, at this moment, thanks Cable. Yeah, Space Ghost has been such a joy to work on. I really think that out of the licensed work that I've done, because every book that you do, or at least every book that I do, um, you're excited when you do it, and you sort of navigate just the challenges, just the learning curve of each book, and then the book comes out, and there are things you're excited by, and then there's things you're like, "Ugh, okay, now that I see it in the rear view, I should have done this differently." Um, you know, uh, my work on Savage Avengers, for example, like, I'm like, "Oh, I love that book. I wish I had cut, like, these captions here," And so, like, the next book, like, I think I figured that out around when Moon Knight: City of the Dead came out, so by the time Punisher came out, I was using a lot less captions, and same thing with Cable. Um, and similarly, the way that I structured books, when I worked on Savage Avengers, we were doing 5-issue arcs. Same thing with Moon Knight: City of the Dead. Um, by the time we got around to Punisher, that was sort of neither fish nor fowl in that it was a 4-issue miniseries, but I was really encouraged to try to take it as an episodic an approach as possible, for those
Mhm.
4 issues. The I think the only shortcoming to that was that when you have a short runway, like 4 issues, if you only do kinda episodic stories, it can read a little disjointed. You're sort of still kind of finding your stride by the time everything ends. Space Ghost feels like the book where it all came together.
Okay.
Space Ghost, I feel like I really love the way that I've been pacing that book. I really love the way that, particularly the way we've been pacing dialogue. I don't feel like that book's overwritten. I feel like the structure of it, doing the done in one stories, I feel like I owe people like Ryan North and Steve Orlando and Jed McKay like a share of my royalties because I was watching them on books like Fantastic Four and Scarlet Witch and Moon Knight, which are largely episodic. Lots of done in ones, done in twos, and realizing that every time you finish a story, you build investment and engagement with your readership. And so if you can finish your stories on a monthly basis or a bi-monthly basis, and you're given a long runway like Dynamite has been so generous to give Space Ghost. If you're given 13 issues of Space Ghost, which is what we've been given to start, um, that means you have the potential to tell, 8 or 9 complete stories. And that level of investment, most licensed books take, years to build that.
Yeah.
Um, so it's been
Sure.
I kind of like in Space Ghost, I think of it as making cupcakes. They're
Okay.
they're self-contained, they're bite-sized. Uh, uh,
Oh, yeah.
every cupcake has a little bit of a different flavor to it. But I'm not trying to make long sheet cakes here with this thing.
Yeah.
I'm really trying to make everything bite-sized. Um, and yeah,
What I like about it, and I think this is a series for fans of Space Ghost. If you're like, I love Space Ghost, give me more Space Ghost. Here it is. You're gonna like it. It's got a lot of action, a lot of fun, great creative team, looks beautiful. If you're a collector that loves covers, you've had some great like covers and variant covers for
yeah,
some of the issues.
totally.
Um, and just, if you're looking for something a little different with, a superhero story, you've done a couple things in here that I think should be done more or maybe aren't done as well. Not to knock anybody's like superhero story, everyone who's making comics and doing their thing, I love it. But you have a couple of moments in here where, um, Jace, like early on, is kind of does something to save Space Ghost, and like
Yeah.
feels guilty, like doesn't want to participate with the team. And you have this great like Jan's trying to get him out of his like, you know, not really depression or funk or whatever we
Yeah.
want to call it. That he is dealing with this guilt. I don't. I mean, it's this just been out, but I don't want to say exactly what it is. But he Jan's trying to get him to deal with it. He doesn't, he knows that he feels like he knows he did the right thing. Like he feels like he had to do it, but he still feels like terrible about it
Yeah.
and thinks that Space Ghost is mad at him. They have this big, like, cathartic emotional moment where Space Ghost is, no, I'm not mad at you. I'm really mad at myself because I let you down, that I even put you in that situation.
Mhm.
And it was like, and it's all this fun, almost like popcorny superhero comic book actiony stuff. And you have like this real heartfelt, like emotional, like grounded moment, I mean, I was mind like blown reading that. I can't remember which issue it was. I don't know if it was like 4 or 5.
Yeah,
Um,
that was
Mm.
issue 6 with
It
Moltar.
was at 6, but I
Um,
mean, I was just, blown away
Thank you.
by all of that and how just grounded that storytelling was, and that you had the space to kind of do that. That, because, sometimes with licensed properties, they're like, yeah, we don't want to, we don't, we wanted, we want, we want to get the nostalgia fans, and we can bring in a new audience, but like you're telling us a real story. Like you're having fun and you're saying something. That's
Yeah.
not easy to do.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, and I think a lot of that speaks to, Warner Brothers has been excellent in terms of working with licensors. I've worked with many different licensors, at this point in my career, and Warner Brothers has by far been the best. They really have given us a lot of latitude, particularly on Space Ghost. Dynamite has really kind of, been very hands off and just sort of been like, let's let David and Jonathan cook. Um, and I think that's been very helpful. I think also like you shouldn't. I can't overstate that I get to tell a superhero story without any of some of the obstacles of a shared universe. I don't have to negotiate with other creators about like, hey, can I use Zorak? I just get to
Yeah.
be like, it's my book. I'm using Zorak. I feel like I owe like Joe Casey like an apology because like when he was working on the upcoming Space Quest miniseries, I know he ran into a little bit of hassle where he was like, "Oh, can I use this villain?" And I think Dynamite kept being like, "Nope, David's already got plans for that one." And so he wound up finding a deep cut Space Ghost villain that I actually didn't have plans for, but it was like one of the only ones. And so
Oh, that's funny.
you know, I think Warner Brothers has been really cool about, when Joe Rybant, my editor, approached me about this book, I asked him just flat out, like, what are you guys looking for here? Are you looking for like just a continuation of the 60s cartoon? Because I'm probably not the guy for that. And I asked the same thing about Coast to Coast. I said, are they looking for a Coast to Coast revival? Because I'm also probably not the guy for that. But coming off of like Punisher and Moon Knight City of the Dead, I kind of had a feeling of what they wanted. And so I made my pitch as, we've seen a standalone Space Ghost origin. Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti mined that very thoroughly in their 2005 miniseries. But we never really explored like in depth of how he came into Jan and Jace's orbit and how they became his trusted sidekicks. And so that really kind of became like the emotional through line for me. Dr. Grant and Tim and Lex from Jurassic Park were like big influences on that.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Dr. Grant does not like kids when that movie starts. And then by the time that the movie's over, he would die for those kids. And that's how I
Right.
felt about Space Ghost. I think it also was really helpful that just like Alex Toth designed so many great villains with so many great concepts, and the designs do so much heavy lifting that you could understand the concepts pretty quickly, but they still left a lot of room for reinterpretation and recontextualization. Anybody who knows my work knows I love to inject different strains of pop culture into things. I wear my influences, I think, pretty proudly on my sleeves, as you can see from the very first page of Cable. And Space Ghost has proven to be really fertile ground for all that. Space Ghost and his villains and his supporting cast. That you can inject all these different strands of pop culture. You can turn Zorak into the Charles Manson of space. You can turn Creature King into Caesar from Planet of the Apes meets Colonel Kurtz.
Uh-huh.
Metalis can be, the best parts of Doctor Doom, Bane, and General Zod. And it all seems to fit within these archetypes. So, yeah, it's been a really fun book, and I think the thing that's helped me with the formula, because I always kind of want to have two different lanes of storytelling, so I don't get caught in a ditch somewhere, is you have the superhero action, like you said, and then for me, it's always been about what's the ongoing relationship between Space Ghost and the kids. Are they going one step forward and they're learning to trust and appreciate and admire each other more? Is there a setback that sort of puts their relationship on the back foot or puts things into question? Being able to kind of tackle that on an issue to issue basis, I think, has been um, the great joy of this book for me. I said earlier, like I never really understood how I fell into the extreme superhero niche, because I feel most at home when there's a little bit of angst maybe, but like that there is like a solid heart of gold underneath all of that. I don't think I necessarily subscribe to the pure anti-hero of it all. I
Okay.
need those characters to have like a gooey center somewhere, and I feel like we did that in Savage Avengers, and we're and to an extent in Moon Knight City of the Dead, certainly in Space Ghost. If you can't feel something for these characters, it's gonna be a long road to read it. It's gonna be certainly even longer for me to write it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not someone that, is, I guess as I've gotten older, I think I had a period where I really liked like anti-hero type stories, but
Sure.
I don't know, as I've gotten older, I've found them less fulfilling in terms of the media I consume, but,
Yeah.
maybe because 'cause I've been watching a lot of Shrinking. I've Space Ghost had, like, the Harrison Ford character vibe, like, there
Yeah.
was, like, a like, not necessarily like a gruffness or grumpiness as it, as it wore on a little, maybe that's also a little bit of, like, Han Solo aspect to it, like a character that you don't think would deal well with kids. But I mean, yeah, per, with Dr. Grant in Jurassic Park is perfect. I didn't think of that, but as soon as you said it, it made total
Yeah.
sense. But
Wait
yeah,
till you read issue 9. I feel like we pay off a lot of that in a really fun and cool way. And yeah, as I'm writing 11 and 12 and our annual, we're sort of finding new ways to kind of keep digging into that more. But
awesome.
yeah, those Space Ghost and those kids, man, I would write that book for a good long while, if the market proves viable for it. I Stay tuned. Hopefully, I'll have more news to
All
share on
right.
that soon.
Good. I mean, yeah, I'm really enjoying it. Like it continually. I mean, I don't know how often you, if at all, like look at reviews, but it's it continues to be very well reviewed by some of the sites that I trust their opinion and think the reviewers do a nice job or at least line up with my sensibility. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. So I even
Thank
if you're
you.
like have no relationship listeners with Space Ghost and didn't think you'd ever pick up a Space Ghost book, you definitely check it out. I think it's something really special. But now before we end, I want to turn to two things that
Yeah.
haven't been out yet. Um, but I know that I think with Mad Cave, you are. I think there's going to be a zero issue for Free Comic Book Day, which listeners, if you
Okay.
don't know, you probably do, but the first Saturday in May is Free Comic Book Day. There's going to be a zero issue of Speed Racer that you're writing, a backup tale by, I think, for a Racer X backup tale by Mark Russell.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if they've announced all the artists yet who are involved,
No,
but
they have
yeah,
not, but there are some cool artists,
yeah,
involved in these books.
and
Um,
yeah, so you got that coming out, and then just announced today, I saw you are going to be writing Captain Planet.
yeah. Uh, Boy, yeah, that one has been a very long time coming. It's so funny. I posted on my Twitter today that actually tomorrow marks exactly 10 years since I messaged one of my best friends saying, weirdly, I think I want to relaunch Captain Planet. So hold on to your dreams long enough, and eventually they do become true. Literally, almost exactly a decade after you manifest them. I was checking through my Facebook, and I was like, "Oh no, it really was January 22nd, 2015." So that's just a wild bit of the universe kind of locking together. But yeah, I guess to talk about Speed Racer a bit.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about that book. Like you said, we're starting off on Free Comic Book Day with a special zero issue, just to kind of get you in on the ground floor of like what this world looks like, particularly Palm City and Formula X racing and where speed kind of fits in all of that. And Mark Russell is doing a backup story introducing his Racer X side series. Racer X will
Okay.
be appearing in both books, but Mark will be kind of tackling stories that are more Rex centric from his point of view. So yeah, similar to Space Ghost, I took a very similar approach to Speed Racer in that I didn't grow up with Speed Racer. Of course, like I grew up in like the late 80s, early 90s. I knew of Speed Racer through cultural osmosis, and of course, I watched the amazing 2008 movie by the Wachowskis. Um, but it was last San Diego Comic Con that both Speed Racer and Captain Planet kind of came together. I was doing a signing for my horror book with Bad Cave, The Devil Wears My Face, and Chaz Pangburn, one of the editors over there, has been had been reaching out to me about licensed work in the past. The timing at it didn't work, or I didn't really know the license. I didn't really feel like I had like a story that kind of jumped out at me. And he pulls me aside at San Diego and he says, "Listen, we've been working with Tatsunoko Productions on Gotcha Man. It's been going really well. And nobody knows this, but we are going to pick up the rights to Speed Racer. And what would you have any interest in that?" And man, I immediately started thinking of car chases. I love writing car chases. For my earliest books, Spencer and Locke and Spencer and Locke 2 both have big car chase set pieces in both of those. The OZ has a little bit of a car chase in it. I've got elements of it in some of my other books as well, but I love car chases in the comics medium, stuff that like what Trad Moore did on All New Ghost Rider, what they did in Hawkeye, during the Fraction run. Um, it's definitely like I love seeing what car chases can do in the medium. So I was like, oh, you're offering me 16 months where I can do a car chase in every issue. Yeah, that's the kind of book you don't get to do. That's like a
Yeah.
once in a career kind of opportunity, and I knew that at that moment, beyond Speed Racer having such longevity in popular culture, just the ability to be able to tell that kind of story, it felt like the sort of opportunity you can't turn down. And so I watched, similar to Space Ghost, I rewatched all the old episodes of Speed Racer, and I wrote detailed notes on all of them. And then I kind of took that and figured out, all right, how do we kind of recontextualize these things? This is brand new continuity. You don't have to have watched anything or read anything in order to get in on our series. Um, I pitched it as Rocky in a race car. It's how does Speed Racer go from winning illegal street races to becoming the fastest race car driver in the world? And watching him grow in his journey as he embarks on the Formula X championship in Palm City. And without spoiling too much, like his reasons for competing are very personal. There is no room for second place for Speed. There's a lot of things on the line that he needs to win if he wants his way of life to continue. And so it's been a really fun book in just being able, like Space Ghost, saying if Speed Racer debuted in the year 2025, what would it look like? And we're not shying away from like the original cartoon. I think if anything, we're just kind of giving it a 21st century polish.
Right.
And so we're sort of still in the very preliminary stages of that book. I've given Tatsunoko my roadmap for that series, 16 issues worth. And so we're in production on the Free Comic Book Day issue now. So we have a really cool artist working on Speed Racer. The hint I'll give you is that this is somebody I've worked with before. So you'll have to check my League of Comic Book Geeks page to place your bets.
Wow. I've read most of your stuff, so I think I
It-
have a short list.
it's but they're very talented. I was very excited when they said they could do the book, and the pages I've seen have
Awesome.
been sensational. And I know Mark's got some really cool stuff planned for that book as well. But you'll get to
That's
meet
great.
Speed, you'll get to meet Pops and Trixie and Spritel, and of course Racer X, and just seeing the way that they kind of their lives intersect with each other over the course of the Formula X Championship tournament. It's a
Nice.
really fun read.
Oh, I can't wait. I'm a, I love Mad Cave and the stuff that they do. Um, I think last year their free comic book day issues were Flash Gordon with Jeremy Adams and Will Conrad, which has been a really fun series, and also Gotcha Man, which you mentioned with Cullen Bunn and Chris Batista. And I think the issues that they've put out of both of those have been fantastic. So I have all the faith in the world in Mad Cave, and I can't wait to see who you're working with. So I hope another excellent start to a series for Free Comic Book Day in May. Yeah, that sounds a lot of fun. But now to turn to back to, to Captain Planet, which we've mentioned.
Yeah.
So now we've talked about, you've done creator-owned stuff, you've done licensed work, and you mentioned with Space Ghost, with Speed Racer, going back and looking at some of the original stuff that was put out to get a feel or a flavor for the character. But now here's something that is now coming to fruition with Dynamite, right?
Yeah.
That you've been talking about or trying to get going for 10 years.
10
I
years.
would have to think that you had to be a fan of the original and have had, a long gestation period to think about, if I got the chance, this
Yes.
is what it is I would want to do. And I can't believe it. Honestly, cannot believe it hasn't been done yet.
That
Um,
that was honestly my thinking. I grew up in the 90s. Uh, I am self-admitted 90s trash. And so I grew up with Captain Planet. I knew that character. I knew the Planeteers. I knew the villains. That's all kind of like baked into my DNA at this point. And it was around 10 years ago when I was just kind of getting my start. I think I was writing the outline for Spencer and Locke at that point. I don't think we'd even found a publisher yet. I think George Santiago Jr. and I had just hooked up to start working on that. And I remember talking to a buddy of mine, of just like when I was getting my start in the business. I'm a big fan of fan fiction. Real talk.
okay.
I think that like so much of being a professional comics creator is getting your reps in, not necessarily being published. Like you need to build those muscles before you worry about getting published. And so I think fan fiction is a perfectly valid way to get your reps in. Especially when you're starting out, because you learn, okay, like the character a little bit, so you can figure out plot, you can figure out emotional beats, because you don't necessarily have to that character already. You don't have to come up with them whole cloth. Something I did very early on was, when I met my wife, uh, I I was not vibing on what DC was publishing at that moment. And so as an exercise, I wrote 52 pitches for different DC properties to like just figure out like, okay, you want 52 flavors, here's what I
Right.
would do. And
Wait, can I
uh,
just ask, how like detailed were they? Like, so when
I
you say
mean,
you like 52 pitches, like a couple of lines, a paragraph, a whole outline, like,
it was more of like a mission statement, like a
oh,
like a
okay.
concept.
Still
But also it's like
52.
how do these books fit together?
Yeah.
Uh uh one example that I had was like that the Firestorm Matrix was the United States government trying to reverse engineer a Green Lantern ring. Um,
Oh,
and like
okay. I'd
that
I'd
was,
read that.
like
It's actually
that
a
that
really
that
good idea.
that like Firestorm and Hal Jordan, like they had fairly similar trajectories because of like Abin craft being found in Area 51, stuff like that. So as I kind of progressed from the short form concept work and I started kind of thinking about scripts and thinking about like fully fleshed out outlines, Captain Planet was something that kind of sprung to mind fairly early on for the reasons that you said, which is I can't believe nobody's done this. I thought in 2015, where by then, we were already, like thinking, I think the difference between like where we were thinking in 2015 versus like when I graduated college, right in the midst of the '08 recession. Um, I think we were already thinking a lot more clearly about inclusion and diversity and also just political accountability. And this was sort of well before the Trump administration and everything that's sort of gone on in the 8 years since then. But I remember thinking like, oh, Captain Planet is a property that is inherently political. It's inherently diverse and multicultural and international, and it speaks to pressing issues that are only becoming more pressing by the day. In
Yeah.
terms of not just climate change, environmental catastrophe. And I think that's a big thing that people get tripped up on is when they think of climate change or they think of environmental stories, they're like, oh, well, like there's smog in the air, or like, oh, they're not recycling enough, or like there's, ocean or there's islands of garbage, all of which are awful things. But I live in Los Angeles. Like there are wildfires going on just a few miles north of me. There are still wildfires going on in Eaton and the Palisades. Um, this is real world stuff. I lived through Sandy when I lived in New York. Like I like environmental, like climate change is environmental disasters, and there are people on the ground who are impacted by this stuff
Right.
all the time. And so the flip side of that is what's causing all this, and the answer is human greed. That there are people who will stop at nothing to consolidate money and power, and they don't care about the long-term consequences because they feel like they can buy their way out of it. And that was something that occurred to me 10 years ago. And it is awful and horrifying that this has become way more timely in the 10 years since.
Yeah.
Um, it has not escaped me that um, I was given the green light to pursue Captain Planet at San Diego Comic-Con last year. Dynamite had just announced that they had acquired the rights from Warner Brothers, along with several other Warner Brothers properties. And as I got the email with the press release, I was at BarCon and I saw Nick Barucci and Joe Ryban at BarCon, and I walked over with my iPhone and I said, "You're giving me this book, right? This has been my white whale. I've wanted to write this for years." And I I turned in my outline. Um, it was the week before the election, and we were officially greenlit with that outline the day after the election.
Oh, wow.
And then as we're talking, this is the day after the inauguration that we announced the book. And it's one of those things that, like, I hate that it's this timely. Um, but I think in a lot of ways, not just Captain Planet, who is sort of this immortal elemental protector of our planet, who we'll see as the series progresses, has had a lot of adventures over the millennia. Um, but the motto, the catchphrase for Captain Planet is "The power is yours," and that's the thing that really stood out to me. This is the Planeteer's story. I pitched this as X-Men meets Green Lantern meets Avatar: The Last Airbender. You know, what happens when five ordinary people from around the world are suddenly gifted power that they don't understand, but that there are rich and powerful interests who are immediately chasing after them because they want to exploit them and their abilities.
Yeah.
And regardless of what the cost is to the rest of the planet. Um, how do these people find each other? How do these people learn to trust each other, given that they come from such different walks of life? Um, that always seemed like a really interesting story to me. And I think in a post-Avatar world, I think this is probably where my idea had come from, was I had just seen Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I was like, oh, the fire bending and the earth bending and the water bending and the air bending, like that's really cool. It's very visually interesting. There's a lot of versatility to the powers. Uh, why didn't they do anything like that? They should have. It's too bad they didn't do anything like that with Captain Planet. And then I was like, wait, somebody could do that with Captain Planet. And 10 years later, somebody is doing that with Captain Planet. Uh,
Wow.
so it's really been, I gravitate towards, I think, the properties that might be overlooked, the ones that might need a little bit more love. I My favorite word for a property is potential. Because that's something that I can do. That's something I can speak to. My my favorite response to my books, I've written, this is my 12th book, I think, and almost every single book, when it comes out, somebody will say, "Didn't think I'd like this book, but I really like this book," and I thrive on that. I
Yeah,
love being underestimated. I appreciate when readers still give us a shot after that and give us that opportunity to rise to the occasion. Um, and so I think Captain Planet is a book that's just like that. And
right.
seeing the overwhelming response today, I think people see the vision. And I think
Yeah.
people instinctively know that not just Captain Planet, but the Planeteers themselves, they really are kind of now more than ever the heroes we need right now.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, I just think that the cartoon was out in what, like 90, 91, and
started
then
in
I think
'89, yeah, '89
89.
to,
Okay.
'96.
Okay. I think it did have a short. I'm gonna say it did have like a, every cartoon in like the late 80s, early 90s had a comic book run. I think there was like a very short, maybe
Yeah, in the
12
'90s, the
issue
Marvel.
run. Yeah, 91 or 92. And that, but any of it in that time frame. Um, yeah, but I'm just surprised that in the 35 years or so since it debuted, um, that nobody else, especially in recent time, has tried to do something with it. I
Yeah,
mean, one, because it felt like I it seemed like as a kid in the mid to late 80s, there was a huge push for environmental stuff, conservation, environmental protection.
totally.
That stuff was huge. Captain Planet was like a big part of that. I mean, I remember watching the cartoon. I really loved it. Um, and it is when initially whenever I think of Captain Planet now, the first two things I think of are instantly, I can't believe nobody has done something with this yet because it seems like it's even more pressing.
Yeah,
Not just stuff about, I mean, everything from AI and billionaires and energy consumption to the fact that you're in LA. The Eaton and Palisades fires, there's a direct link to what we're seeing in terms of, you know, climate change, other hurricanes and natural disasters and hitting areas that haven't been hit before, droughts, too much rain. Like all of these things are tied into how what man-made climate change,
100%.
and it just that piece of it, along with, I don't remember, maybe I would have to go back and look at reviews or look at articles at the time, but when I was a kid, I don't remember anything about Captain Planet being like necessarily political. Now, I mean, I think it is in terms of, it was about the environment. There was the bad guy. There were like villains, but
Sure.
I think nowadays it's even more maybe partisan is the word I'm looking for. Like, because I think there would instantly be a gut reaction from one side of the aisle about who are the villains in Captain Planet, and I don't think that was the case 35 years ago because nobody
No, I
nobody juxtaposed themselves against the planet as the enemy.
I think our politics have metastasized, um,
Yeah,
in
I
in
would
in
agree.
in in I mean, really, really since, like, the Bush era, post 9/11 politics. I think, yes, what was seen in the '90s as, harmless, if somewhat maybe hokey edutainment, um, now is like seems almost like bleeding edge political, seems almost
Right,
subversive.
right.
Just by virtue of these characters existing, and just by virtue of these characters' mission. I, I say this not like I say this because I find it funny. But I saw one person in our announcement today who was like, "Oh, is it going to be Captain Woke?"
Yeah,
F
David, I almost just said that like, out without any context, if you just said, "Oh, David Pepose, he has a new series about," like, if Captain Planet didn't exist and you just made an announcement, "Oh, I got a new series, it's called Captain Planet, it's gonna be, about protecting the environment." The
Yeah,
headline on Bleeding Fool or whatever these other sites are that I don't really know too much about
yeah,
would say like, "Oh, Yeah, woke David Pepose ma
And I think
says
I
tries
think
to save the environment, like,
and I
that would
think
100% be what it is.
and I think this is another reason why I wanted to tackle this series as much as I did, is you see it going back all the way back to Dwayne McDuffie and his run on Justice League, where people were giving him all manner of grief by having, like, I don't know, what, 3 people of color in the Justice League? And that was sort of before everything really metastasized and got
Oh.
really bad. That was, what, in 2008, 2009, 2010 at the latest. Um, and for me, my thinking is Captain Planet does all of this in such an organic way. Like, of course, if you're the guardian environmental spirit of our planet, and you have to choose 5 people to wield your power, you're gonna bring them in from around the world, and they're gonna be from all sorts of different backgrounds and ethnicities and ways of life.
Right.
And seeing those people from around the world coming together for a common cause, which is we don't want to see people die. That's ultimately what Captain Planet and the Planeteers mission statement is that they wanna make sure that this world is habitable, and so that, like, people in New York aren't getting drowned in flash floods and the people in Los Angeles aren't having their houses burned down.
Right.
My parents in Missouri aren't, enduring, like, basically a frozen city. Um, I think that Captain Planet as a property does it flawlessly, honestly. I think, it was very much a product of its time when it came out in 1989, and that's been something that's been so fun for me, is finding different ways to kinda recontextualize these characters a little bit, and give
Uh-huh.
them a little bit more specificity, but also just, the geopolitical lines have shifted since 1989. Linka is a great example. She's one of my favorite characters in the whole book because in the original series, those the first season she was referred to as from the Soviet Union, and obviously things changed pretty quick in that. But she was always seen as the most conservative, rule following of the Planeteers. And my thinking was, okay, but this is like a Russian 20 something in the year 2025, she's gonna be the most progressive out of all of them. She's in like a Pussy Riot kind of band.
Huh.
When we meet Linka, she's getting arrested. And luckily for her, that's when she gets the power of wind. Um, Getting to do that, Wheeler is another character. We shuffled him a little bit. That now he's an auto worker from Detroit. And so
Okay.
his opinion on green technology and
Right.
environmentalism and not just all of that, but the way that other people protest, he's gonna have a very different opinion on
Yeah.
all of
Yeah.
that. And I see him as kind of the point of view character because um, he's the guy who we all kind of have to convince, like, this matters, that the Planeteers mission statement about, like, protecting our world from the evils of human greed is important. And it's something that we can't just wait for some big hero to save us. The power is ours. We have to be the boots on the ground for all of this. Um, so that's been, like, I think really fun, and trust me, nobody's more surprised than me that somebody hasn't done this sooner. Uh,
Right.
but I think it speaks to, again, the hidden potential. I think a lot of people overlook Captain Planet. They say the guy with the mullet, you know?
Yeah.
And maybe have thought, "Oh, well, the villains, maybe they felt a little on the nose." I don't know, man. I saw Lucian Plunder throwing Sig Heils at the inauguration yesterday. Like, I don't think, we basically have Hoggish Gridley in the White House. I
Yeah.
think at this point, subtlety's out the window.
Oh, yeah. I
Uh,
mean, yeah, subtlety, there's so many things.
yeah.
Parody is dead, subtlety's out the
Subtlety's dead.
window.
Um, but I think having a book, having a team that's so rooted in empathy and finding common cause amongst different ways of life, I think is something that we need right now. I think it's
Yeah.
so I'm Jewish. I grew up Jewish. My wife did not grow up Jewish. She's Jewish now. But a big learning curve for her was hearing, people on the internet saying just anti-Semitic things, just openly. People on the street, even in Los Angeles, saying anti-Semitic stuff. And I had to explain to her that I was like, there are people in this world who have never met a Jewish person. And so it's very easy to think the worst out of us. And I'm lucky. I have privilege. I pass. When I walk in the streets, nobody besides the Hasidic community at my local Ralph's is going to clock me as a Jewish person. There are a lot of people who they're from marginalized communities who
Yeah.
they don't have that privilege. And so having a book like Captain Planet where you see these characters kind of instinctively, like, they have that distrust, they don't know each other, they have very different ways of doing things, but then kind of quickly learning how to trust each other and rely on each other and stand up for each other. I feel like if a book like that can give people even the slightest bit of a second thought, the slightest bit of finding some empathy with a group that they might not be aware of,
Mhm.
um, then I feel like the book is worth it. Like I said with about cable, like if it's just empty entertainment, then it's not worth the time. I think especially today, especially with a book like this, there's some good that can be done. And so we're really pushing as hard as we can to make sure we live up to those ambitions. And so I'm very excited for readers to see what we've got planned.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what you have planned as well, especially knowing that it's something that you've wanted to do for 10 years. I mean, that's very exciting that you're able to do it. I did want to say I think I mentioned that other than the cartoon and I think there was like a short-lived short-lived comic book. I didn't think there was anything else. I was forgetting there was the Don Cheadle as Captain Planet for Funny
Uh,
or Die.
yeah,
So so if there is that as well,
yes.
which is great.
Somebody asked me on Twitter, how did you get this book? And I was like, I had to turn a lot of people into trees before I could do this. So yes, I wish Don Cheadle was still on Twitter. What I wouldn't do for a retweet from him. Um, uh, I'm trying to get LeVar Burton to give us a shout out. But yeah, that's the I find the Don Cheadle Captain Planet such a funny, like, meme of it all
Yeah.
in a way that I think when Space Ghost came out, there were a lot of people who they love Coast to Coast, and I love Coast to Coast too. I grew up with Coast to Coast, but they're like, "Why isn't this Coast to Coast?" And they were legit mad about this not being Coast to Coast. This is just really funny. Like anybody who's like, "Why doesn't it look like Don Cheadle?" I'm like, "Okay, that's hilarious." Like I'm gonna get a lot of use of those gifs over the next 9 months or so.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe Dynamite can get somebody to do like a Don Cheadle cover.
Is he on Cameo? Maybe I can see if I can get him to give us a shout out.
Um, yeah, I don't know, but well, David, this has been such a pleasure to talk to you
Oh,
about
likewise.
all these things that you have coming out. I was going to ask at the top, and I didn't, but I knew that you were in Los Angeles, so I hope that you and your wife and
Thank you.
family remain safe. I
Yeah,
know that it's been really tough on a lot of members of
we've
the
been
comic book, the animation, the film community of, so
we've
I've
been
had some
very
friends that
lucky.
were
Um,
evacuated, but are, it's pretty
yeah,
scary out there.
my
I
brother
would have to
evacuated for
imagine.
a night, but, he's safe, thankfully, and we live south of him, and, so we're outside of the evacuation zones, and we're very lucky. The closest fires to us were the Hollywood Hills fires, and, those were put out pretty quickly. But yeah, you become very aware of how precarious things might be
Yeah.
when the winds might be carrying embers at 80 miles per hour. And suddenly, the fires can go to unexpected places. And so I think we are long overdue of thinking about how do we fix how do we stem the damage? How do we and I unfortunately it feels like our leaders are not thinking about that. So it's just kind of up to us to do what we can on the ground until hopefully one day maybe saner minds will prevail.
I I hope so. I hope that that is the case. But I hope you remain safe in LA. And yeah, listeners, cable, love and chrome, go get it. You're going to love it. Even like me, if you're not, if you don't have that wealth of knowledge in terms of Marvel stuff, it's just a great story. I love the mix of action and romance. Space Ghost has been incredible, and yeah, we're all going to look forward to Speed Racer on Free Comic Book Day with Mad Cave and Captain Planet with Dynamite. Which is that a March or April?
Captain Planet will be coming out April. It'll be actually coming out the week of Earth Day. So,
Oh, perfect. Yeah,
just before Free
makes
Comic
sense.
Book Days. So yeah, you can get Captain Planet and then Speed Racer right back to back.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Shout out to my brother Bobby, the Cryptic Creator Corner's #1 most dedicated fan. Bobby listens to all my episodes, and I'm sure he'll be picking up some of these as well. I made sure that he read The Devil That Wears My Face because I just as soon as I was done my issues, I was like, just read it. Just you don't know anything about it. Just read it.
Thank
Just
you.
read
I
it.
love that book.
So yeah,
One of my
you
favorites.
and Alex and who lettered it?
Justin Birch. Yeah.
Justin Birch. Yeah. Fantastic. Fantastic. So like thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Of course, my pleasure.
So listeners, you can find me on Blue Sky, you can find me on Twitter or on the Cryptic Creator Corner website. Let me know what it is that you're reading, especially if you read any of David's books or have checked them out or are excited to. Find me, let me know. I like to hear feedback on what it is you're reading with the guests of the podcast. And David, I wish you the best of luck. I hope you stay
Thank you.
safe, and we're all going to be looking forward to all the stuff you have coming out, especially Captain Planet.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, listeners, good night, and I will see you next time.